guys, it's me, Estella, and I'm back today with a interview tips video. So pretty much it is a continuation of my college app survival guide series, and today I'm gonna pretty much just be talking about my personal experience with interviews and all the tips that I have now that I've gone through them, and basically how to ace your college interviews. I have some pretty interesting stories to tell, that's for sure, and some interesting insights, and hopefully this will kind of make the whole interview process seem less stressful for you. Also, I quickly wanted to mention that this video is made possible by Compass News. Knowing what's happening in the world can be pretty important to succeed in your interviews, and while most news sources take too much time and money, Compass News gives you all you need to know summarized in 3 bullet points so that you can sound smart and nail your interviews without any effort. So stay tuned for when I talk about them a little bit later in this video. So tip number 1 might come off as really blunt and shocking, but honestly, I don't think the college interviews matter at all. I know that sounds really shocking to you guys, but just hear me out and let me explain why the college interviews actually don't matter at all and why you shouldn't stress out about them. Okay, well, they do matter to a slight extent, but they overall don't really affect your application. Honestly, it's not really secret info or insider info. Every single senior figures this out by the time they're done with the whole college application process. I did over 10 interviews, and I kid you not, when every single interviewer I talked to said that the interview didn't matter. All of them told me that pretty much the point of the interview was for me to ask questions about the school so I got to know the school better, and for them to just kind of feel me out and see if there's any major red flags about me. But overall, if there aren't any major red flags, then it doesn't affect your college application. Again, this is just from what I heard and also from my personal experience, but I honestly don't think they affect anything. For instance, something that happened quite frequently at my school was I would get an interview for one school and other people wouldn't get an interview for that school, and vice versa. I would be freaking out that someone else got an interview for a school and I didn't get the interview for that school, and it was all just kind of a conundrum and everyone was confused. It doesn't matter if you get an interview, does it not? And honestly, it does not. A ton of people, including myself, got interviews for schools that we all got rejected from and didn't get interviews for schools that we got into. Again, there is a reason why almost every single school has it as optional, except I think MIT. It probably matters for MIT, but apart from MIT, I think all the other schools don't really care that much. It's honestly just a way to evaluate, like, is there a huge red flag or not? That being said, the reason I am telling all of this to you is because I know that a ton of people, including myself, freak out when they don't get an interview or they do get an interview and that it has to be perfect and all that kind of stuff. Honestly, after the first couple ones where they all told me that it doesn't matter, I really calmed down and I actually really enjoyed all of my interviews. So yeah, even though the interviews overall don't seem to impact your college application in a positive way, you obviously don't want to have any huge red flags like being rude, disrespectful, saying something really bad, or anything like that. My tip number 2 is to not be late. It is definitely always not nice to be tardy. Even if they're not gonna really hold it against you, it's still just common decency to show up on time. I personally always showed up around 15 minutes beforehand, and honestly, all of my interviewers also showed up exactly on time, or at least 10 minutes early. My tip number 3 is to not freak out if you can't find your interviewer. This happened so many times to me where I didn't really know what the interviewer looked like, so I got confused and we were trying to find each other because we didn't know how we looked like, and it was confusing. But if you have their email or their phone number, it's great to just reach out to them. Hey, I'm at the coffee shop or wherever you're meeting up. I'm sitting in this corner wearing this outfit, like a shirt with pearls or a pink shirt or something like that, and that will help them figure out it's you. Tip number 4 is to know how the interviews work. So for some schools, you actually have to request them yourself, but for other schools, you just have to wait until an alumni interviewer contacts you, and they will contact you and let you know when and where they can meet up, and then you schedule it from there. For instance, for Johns Hopkins, Vanderbilt, and Carnegie Mellon, I had to personally request the interview through the portal, so make sure you do that. Also, to have an interview for Duke, you need to apply by a certain deadline, which I actually didn't realize last year, so make sure you apply by that deadline. For the Ivies, you don't need to do anything on your side. The interviewers will reach out to you via email depending on their availability. As you guys probably can tell by this point, alumni interviews are pretty much considered optional, and they are based on the availability of the alumni interviewers. That's why you might not get an interview while someone else at your school does. It might be that they applied a little earlier so their name is higher on the list, or it's alphabetical order and the person is going by alphabetical order, etc. But yeah, pretty much don't stress if you don't get an interview for a certain school. For instance, I didn't get an interview for Johns Hopkins and I still got in even though I requested it and everything like that. But yeah, the interviewers literally only get your name and your email, and that's it. So they don't know anything. I think they also get your school name, but that's literally it. And they don't know anything about your scores, stats, extracurriculars. So it's completely based on their availability, and some regions don't even have interviewers that are alumni of a certain school, so no one gets an interview. Also, sometimes there are just way too many applicants in a certain year, and consequently there's just not enough alumni interviewers and time on their hands to meet up with students. Always remember that usually the alumni interviewers have a job or are professors, not usually all of them are, but they have stuff going on, so they're not available all the time to meet with like 50, 60, 100 students in a short span of a couple months, so they do have to cut down the list and just randomly choose some students. My next tip is to bring your resume and email it to them beforehand if they ask for it, or just ask them, do you want my resume, and email it to them. Usually, in my experience, they always would want to have the resume beforehand, or they would ask me to bring it to them and then they would read over it very briefly while I would be getting a coffee, and then we talk. But usually the interviewers do want a resume, and it also looks good if you show up with like a nice little notepad or a folder with your resume in it, and it just kind of adds to the whole vibe that you're taking it seriously. My next tip is to be up to date on the news. Now, this is not really a requirement or anything. Honestly, it's fine if you don't check the news, but something that happened in a couple of my interviews was they brought up current news and what was going on in the world, and luckily I'm fairly up to date with what's going on in the world, so I was able to answer them back. But yeah, even though they probably won't count off points on you or anything like that, it's still great just to have a conversation with someone else who's an intellectual and just talk about the news and also look like you're not completely unaware of what's happening in the world. Speaking of news, I'd like to really quickly talk about Compass News and what they're all about. If you're like me, you probably find the news to be a bit repetitive, overcomplicated, and frustrating at times. And honestly, I sometimes find myself ignoring it. But news is super important, especially for students and people applying to colleges. A good knowledge of current affairs really helps you stand out and perform well in your exams. Fortunately, there's a way to stay informed without spending ages on uninteresting, time-wasting news websites. Compass News is an app which keeps you up to date no matter how busy you are or how much money you have. You get articles from sites like the New York Times, Wired, and the Financial Times. But most importantly, they all come with 30-second summaries so you can understand the key points and then get on with your day. Compass also has a unique feature called the Story So Far. It explains all of the background information you need to know on complicated topics, so even if you've been ignoring the news for months, you'll be caught up in seconds. A subscription to Compass News costs just $1 a month. So you'll be saving loads of time and money compared to traditional subscriptions, which sometimes cost over $20 a month. There are no adverts, so the app looks great. I'm so thankful they reached out to me, and honestly, it is actually a seriously great app, and I highly recommend those of you who want to stay up to date on the news to check out Compass News. You can actually try it out by clicking the link in my description box. I highly recommend checking it out, and yeah. My next tip is to not freak out if your interviewer throws you some hardball questions. So let me just tell you, one of my interviewers literally asked me, if you were living in a dorm room, would you be the queen bee? I would mention anything, and then he would throw it back and be like, what is wise? What is this? What is that? Would you do this? Like all these crazy questions, and this happened in a couple of my interviews, so I definitely got used to it by the second and third one. But yeah, don't freak out. Honestly, just stay calm. But yeah, don't freak out about it. And honestly, they're just trying to throw you off and just make you confused. So don't let them make you confused, and just sound confident whatever you answer, and you'll be fine. And my last tip is to be nice and just be yourself. You don't want to come off as fake or just over eager or anything like that. Just be totally calm, talk about yourself, enjoy it. Maybe if you need to practice with someone else, although honestly I wouldn't stress too much. Oh, also make sure you wear something formal but not too formal. You don't want to show up in a suit. That's just weird. No one ever asks you to show up in a suit, and honestly that's kind of too much. So just show up in something that you would consider sort of formal but not too formal, like if you were going to a prep school or something. I don't know. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful, and yeah, as always, let me know in the comments below if you have any video requests, and that's all I have to say for this video. So bye guys.